Okay, this is, I guess, John, correct me if I'm wrong, our final formal working session before we have to submit a draft of our recommendations. Is that correct, John or Eric? Or
That is correct. You
That's
guys
correct.
are under pressure now.
We're on the clock. So, what this will mean is that we'll spend quite a bit of time sort of fine tuning the draft document you should have received a copy of. Today, though, we're going to be hearing from some very important guests because this is a group of people we've wanted to talk to since our earliest discussions. But our discussions were all built on sort of, I guess, anecdotal or our experiences with these groups. So we're looking at the vulnerable populations that we have to make sure that we cover in our recommendations because these are populations that interface with the police and sometimes I will have to admit viewed as negative interactions. So we have to make sure that we understand their stories and we'll ask them questions. Is Sabina on the call?
Yes.
We'll go right into it because, this is a dear friend. She is, I'll let her introduce herself.
Thank you, Sharon. My name is Sabina Moyedin. I am the Executive Director of the American Muslim Advisory Council. So we're a statewide organization that works to empower the Muslim community, but most of our work is in Middle Tennessee. And so I do hear from community members when there are interactions with the police department, and I've done some background work in asking community members on what it is like, and I've talked with Dr. Fitchard with the community MNCO, community oversight, about our concerns. So, and for today, I made sure I talked to more community members. So you get a full picture of what that relationship is in the Muslim community. So a little bit background. The Muslim community in Middle Tennessee is about 40,000. And so, and we're very, very diverse. And so 15 to 20,000 are Kurds. And then you have about 5,000 that are Somali. And then you have, more from East Africa and then South Asians, you have Arabs. But even if you look at these immigrant communities aren't always Muslim. So when we talk about Arabs, there's a large community of Coptic Christians from Egypt. And so not all Arabs will necessarily be Muslim. And then knowing like East African East African immigrants are not always Muslims either, because you have those from Ethiopia, Nigeria, and you'll have a lot of Christians also. So it's just a very diverse community, and you have to understand the community that you're policing in. So first thing I want to make clear, because and then we have African American Muslims. And we have about, in the Middle Tennessee area, 11 different mosques, and some of them are exclusively serving the Kurdish community or serving the Somali community, and others are very mixed in the communities that they serve. But first thing I want to make clear that the issues you probably heard from other experts, that Black Americans have, African Americans have, Black Muslims have the same issues. So when you think about the Driving While Black report, those same biases happen to Somali Muslims and East African Muslims. And so that's what I've been hearing. There's no difference, because obviously until you're stopped, nobody will know that there was any difference of what specific Black community you're coming from. So, that being said, what I am hearing from some of the community groups is there is a mistrust with the police department, and there's several reasons that this mistrust builds. And one of them, and heard a lot in the Kurdish community, but I've heard it in other immigrant communities also, is the response time for Metro Police. So when there's a complaint, there's a call in, they don't feel like their complaints are prioritized. And they feel like they're, the lag in response time is because, of the particular place in town they live, or their ethnicity, their name, in reporting something. And so they just don't feel like, and you might hear from Metro Police, like, it's, we don't have enough officers, whatnot, but this is what the community feels, and this is from experiences they had. And just the kind of the feeling that maybe if they were reporting something in Green Hills or Belmead, response times would be better. And then when there is a crime, they don't feel like there's a very good follow-up. So the community doesn't feel like they're getting the update on how the investigation is going, that they have to keep pushing and asking, and they get the runaround, and just not feeling there's good follow-up. There's still unsolved cases in some communities. And again, this is just all builds to the mistrust. So, whatever the reasons are, it doesn't matter, but it causes that mistrust. I have personally, helped some community members who are harassed by neighbors, and sometimes their feeling is that their complaints are not taken very seriously. And again, sometimes it comes back to cultural competency, or if you've never been harassed or never experienced bigotry, you don't know how traumatic it is and how it just throws you off. And so I've seen, incidents where neighbors were harassing, but the police kept coming and saying, "We don't see anything. Oh, he looks nice. Your neighbor seems like a nice person." Like, that's the last thing you want to hear. More recently, one of a Somali community member was shot and killed on Murfreesboro Road. And with a recent, and it's unsolved, they don't know who did it. Recently, some community members met with the detective. And we know Murfreesboro Road, that area, there's a lot of homelessness, there's crime. That's known. Everyone knows about it. The police department knows about it. The city knows about it. But pretty much the response we got was, well, the community needs to complain more, and then they'll send more officers. And then it was just like, what? You're penalizing a community because they're not organized enough? And this is an immigrant community. So, how they don't know that this is something like that they have to do in order to get the service that should be available to every Nashvilleian. And so that takes me to the lack of cultural competency training within MNPD. So with AMAC, and for the last several years, we've the Metro Human Relations has had this mobile diversity seminar where cadets go to diverse places and hear from diverse community groups. And so they go to a mosque, and for the last year and a half, AMAC has been kind of conducting the training, the cultural competency training for the Muslim community with the cadets. But that does not happen beyond that. So you're training people, police officers, they're cadets. They're not even police officers yet. They haven't been out on the street. Many of them aren't even from Nashville. They haven't really interacted with all these diverse community groups. And you're spending an hour and a half talking about it, but I'm sure for many of them, it goes in one ear and goes out the other, because you just don't have enough experience. And so there's no follow-up training, anti-bias, cultural competency training with the communities that these officers are training, are serving in the following years, so throughout their career. I mean, apparently they do have some anti-bias training, but you know, that's one thing. And to clarify, I actually serve on the Police Policy Commission on the Workforce Committee, and so we've heard about these, and we're definitely trying to get to the bottom of exactly what their training is and the effectiveness of it. But we feel like so the community doesn't feel like there's, you know, the cultural competency part is there. You know, sometimes feel like people are labeled as gang members based on they have a nickname, but it's very common, like in the Kurdish community, everyone has a nickname. And so, you know, what's the oversight there? What do they understand? How do they understand the communities? And then, and just hearing from Dr. Fitchard, I mean, she was like, you know, there needs to be anti-bias cultural competency training like twice a year for officers. But, you know, that's kind of outward facing in terms of you want better, smarter, where those biases don't come in. But you can solve the outward part. You cannot solve the outward part of it without solving the inward. So you have to look within MNPD and see how much training, cultural competency, anti-bias training do they have to help, you know, with interactions between officers. And so, you know, that's a complaint. We've also heard that, you know, immigrant or minority officers within the department face bigotry and racism. And so, you know, if you're not solving it on the inside, you're not going to do very well on the outside with community groups. You know, there aren't many Muslim officers in the MNPD. I don't know the number of immigrant officers in general, but, you know, talking to some, just, there's a feeling of, you know, they see the bias and discrimination within it, but they have certain skill sets. They don't feel like they're not getting the promotions that they deserve, or they're not being, their skill sets are not being utilized in the best way to really help the communities they serve. So we do know some of the skill sets we need are language, right? Being able to speak the different languages, because you're serving communities that don't speak English very well or don't speak English at all. And so, you know, you got to prioritize, if you want better relationship with these immigrant communities, to have those language, not just a language line. Language line goes so far, right? When a community member actually sees somebody they recognize, they know their name, that they can say, yeah, I'm from this country. It just builds its different level of trust, and you just don't, you're not going to get it from a language line.
Megan, how many Muslim officers do we actually have?
So what I know, I think 3. I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
I think there are three that I know of. But yeah. And so, you know, I've talked with community members, and I know in the Hispanic community, they have the El Protector program. And so I asked different people, like, is that something you think would be beneficial? And I got mixed reactions. So, you know, for one community, they were like, no, like we think that's just going to be, they're just going to sell themselves. We still don't trust them. So, you know, so there's still a huge trust issue that someone like that would not just come and make things, you know, perfect overnight. But then from other community groups and saying, and thinking about the example of what happened on Murfreesboro Road, having some kind of, you know, community liaison, somebody from the community to help them organize and create safer spaces for those areas. I know precincts have community coordinators, But you really need someone within, like really when building trust, someone within the community to help them and advocate for them and what they need. Because again, like what happened in Murfreesboro Road, like the idea that they should have been complaining more, the onus shouldn't always be on them, especially with new immigrants trying to figure out and who have had different experience with police back home. And so it's not the same here. So understanding that, but then, and I'll expand on something on that in a minute.
Well, let me ask you this. 11 mosque, it's not one zip code. It's spread across the city.
Yeah. Middle Tennessee, I'd say. So I think it's like 9, yeah, in Nashville alone.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and if, if you're talking about the high concentration of immigrant Muslims, you would be saying like Salahuddin Center on Owensville Road that serve the Kurdish community, Al Farouk on 4th Avenue that serves Somali community, Al Huda on Murfreesboro Pike, Somali community, Salam on Murfreesboro Pike, which serves a diverse community, so Somali, Yemeni, Uzbek, it's diverse, and then Islamic Center of Tennessee, which is in Antioch, and again, that's a diverse community. So being on the workforce committee, the question of recruitment has come up. Because sometimes, we see that, okay, if there were more minority officers, that would help with the relationship in the communities that they serve. But how do you recruit someone when the officers that are in the department are not totally satisfied with where they are? Or they don't feel like they're getting the promotions that they need, or they are hearing bias, they're suffering, they're receiving end of bigotry or whatnot. So
well, we're charged with dealing with community. One of the things we're coming out with is community policing, which means having people that look like the community in the community.
Yes.
And knowing what areas of town we need to look at to try to go back and recruit, as you say, officers of certain ethnicities is something we then need to look at for and to be able to have individuals in those precincts that mirror the community they're serving. Because we know a force that, one of you all correct me, is 75% or 80% all white men is not what Nashville is.
Right.
We've got to work on that. And that's not something we can snap our finger and do overnight, but it's something we as a city will need to work on to be able to effectively police communities.
Absolutely.
And we're going to have to make a commitment to do. Sharon, your thoughts and anybody else's thoughts? Somebody else step in here.
This is the kind of information that we needed for this committee, and this is one of the reasons it was very important for you to speak to us, because we do know, and somewhat it is the same experience that I would experience as an African American female, but some of it is a little bit different, especially when you get to the language barrier. Also, I will say this. There are some people that might treat an African American a certain way because of the fear of reprisal, that may feel very free to treat a person of a different faith without ever thinking it's an issue at all. So we do, with this cultural competency, people use the term, but it is something that's very, very significant. And that is something that's going to be a thread, because community policing will mean that you're part of the community. You're going to have police officers that take the time and energy to have a relationship with people in the community. So,
and this is, go ahead, Sabina.
One of the challenges is, I think we can all agree that we need the department to look like the communities they serve. But the recruitment is the challenge, right?
Yes.
Because for one thing is the mistrust that's out there. And so why would you join when your family or friends or your community be, making fun of you or looking down, why are you joining? And that's one thing. Second thing, do they see it as a career, a viable career where they can get promoted and they can be successful? Or so you really need to look at not just Muslim police, but diverse police officers. How long do they actually stay on the force before they leave, and why do they leave? And so if you're not, taking care of making sure, diverse people are being promoted and they have a career within the department, well, they are your best recruitment tool. Because if they're happy in the department, they'll be happy to go in the community and get people to join. And praise is going great. I like it. I enjoy it. But if they're unhappy, you're going to have difficult time. And also just with cultural, barriers that policing is not seen, law enforcement is not seen as a very, respectable career, like, or I don't want to say respectable, but more like it's definitely not as safe. It's hard, and all those risks that police officers take, they don't want their children going and taking those risks. So, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Savannah, can I?
Any more questions? Any more questions?
Yeah, this is Bob Fisher. I have a question.
Yeah.
If in the communities that you're describing, if the police officers, if I'm the captain of the precinct that's serving this large immigrant population, what are the organizations, the volunteer organizations or the nonprofits in that area that I should go to say, will you help me police this area appropriately? Can you teach us something? How can you help us? When can we call on you to step in and help avoid a misunderstanding? Is there, for example, and you don't have to give us the list now, but I'm really hung up on the idea that I think we can make a list of all these organizations and then depend on our new leadership to connect with those. But does that make sense to you is what I want to know.
Yeah, I mean, so with the AMAC, that is one of our missions. Like, I do the cultural competency piece for the cadets, but I am always, and sometimes the best way is to know the mosques that are in the precinct and meet with those mosque leaders, know what it's like to go to a mosque and meet with them and talk to them and get to know the community, because it's beneficial in both ways. Our mosques have been targeted for hate crimes, and I'm always telling mosque leaders, you've got to know who the sergeant, the commander in the precinct in your district is, know the community coordinators, have meeting before you need something, but they have to reach out too and make it not necessarily once a year, and it doesn't have to be a big formal meeting, but a way to get to know each other. So AMAC does it, but mosque leaders, you need to know those mosques. They have influence over their communities. In the Muslim community, there aren't too many organizations. So there's the Somali community of Middle Tennessee, but they do more financial aid. So there aren't too many organizations. So mosques are your best bet.
Yeah, in my neighborhood, there's a mosque over on 12 South, and connecting with that leadership team over there, Mr. Fakruddin and others, has really meant a lot to help our community stick together. So, okay, I appreciate that. That's a great suggestion.
Saban, because you know Sharon, can you send Sharon the list of the 9 mosques in Davidson County?
Yeah.
Leader of each of those mosques.
Okay.
That, please. And please feel free to stay on. Let's go on to Judith. Judith, Homeless Commission.
Yes.
Talk to us about concerns that you have about the interaction of the homeless community with the police department.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. Judy Tackett, Director of the Homeless Impacts Division of Metro Social Services. I put my camera on. If for some reason the audio doesn't work, just let me know and I have to turn the camera back off. So the current context, I really want to give the current context really quickly of people experiencing homelessness in Nashville, just to give you an idea. And I'm really looking at the most narrow, visible population, people on the streets and in shelters that will frequent the streets during the day especially. So current educated estimates are 550 to 600 people are in shelters at Nashville Rescue Mission, both two campuses, and also at the Metro Fairgrounds, both two campuses there as well, Fairgrounds and Municipal Auditorium. And then in addition to that, we know that there is on a daily, and these are daily census average. So we know an estimated 600 to 800 people are living outdoors. Through COVID, we've seen an increase in the largest encampments, especially two in the downtown area. I also want to give real quickly, the reason I'm going to give the COVID context is I know it's not a COVID meeting, but it's just to demonstrate how quickly and how easily most vulnerable populations are impacted by crisis. There are closed public spaces like libraries are not open, where people usually can be during the day. Parks, buildings aren't open. Waiting rooms for service providers aren't open or very limited access. Day centers for service providers are not allowing people like they used to be inside, and they could, even dozens of people would be inside. Now it's very, the services happen, but they're happen in small groups, are allowed inside. So church services have stopped. Meal sites changed or stopped. This has been the first time that I've seen food insecurity among people experiencing homelessness. All of that results in increased mental health crisis, increased violence due to that mental health crisis, self-medication, which may be drug use, illegal drug use, and increased calls from neighbors about people experiencing homelessness encampments, and these calls are often going to police departments. So I just wanted to give a kind of that perspective. Also, we have an annual, so a breakdown of, we know that about 45% of people experiencing homelessness are African American. That's compared to the 28% of the general population, and 73% are men compared to 48% in the general population being male. I also pulled for the last quarter the community complaints that we are receiving. Community complaints come through the Homeless Impact Division through the Hub Nashville, the 311 line, through other departments that we have really solid relationship with other departments, and also directly from council members, and some direct calls right to me from neighbors and from the police department. We have created really good relationships with police precincts who want our assistance to link people to services. So one of the impacts of police presence, people experiencing homelessness do have a relationship with police officers. Now, whether it's a positive or negative relationship depends on the officer. There is a lot of fear. It's really easy. It's nearly impossible not to have some kind of record when you have been homeless and on the streets for a long period of time. So there has been some type of negative interaction. We have, and I've also talked to That's Nationwide, and we have a consumer advisory board that right now is a little bit, it's not as active because of connectivity issues. People cannot meet in person. So the communication for people experiencing homelessness is just cut down even more. So if we think we are impacted, people experiencing homelessness on the streets are really cut off. And so with that, I also have nationwide, usually consumer advisory boards in general, people report they do not want to interact with police on an ongoing basis. From police officers is also they're not trained to be social workers. So they're looking at that opportunity of where do we actually connect? And frankly, I've had good conversations with some of the police officers and chiefs, Drake and several other commanders about opportunities, how that could be strengthened. And I kind of want to go into one of the problem I identified clearly is police officers are trained to respond to violent incidences. Police officers are trained to arrest. Police are not mental health or social service providers. And police are asking for that linkage to the social services. So recommendations. There's a huge need to increase street outreach in a coordinated effort. We have some homelessness dollars coming into our community, and we're working on that right now. Those street outreach programs need to be led by nonprofits, by social services providers. We should be really looking in the downtown area to start that, to be visible. There needs to be best practice outreach with mental health professionals on that team. After hour responses should be available also on weekends. I see too much street outreach in Nashville being close to 9 to 5 and not on weekends. And then one suggestion is to divert and look at how that can be done, certain 911 calls to that team. Have a team connection where it's like, if this call is not about necessarily violence, but it's clearly about a mental health breakdown, how can some of these calls be diverted? Right now, Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department is looking at that. They're looking at that right now. The downtown precincts created a quality of life team within a small unit to actually work. They're working closely with the Salvation Army right now to test out how they can engage better around homelessness. I think it needs to be more widespread in the sense of the training needs to be focused at that level. Look for small groups at the precinct level. Police officers need to volunteer for this. They need to want this. It doesn't need to be, they do not need to be trained as social workers. They need to be linked to social workers, but they need to have some access to training for special de-escalation with mental health professionals, trauma-informed care, things like that.
Let me interrupt you for a second. We are recommending a CIT team. Do you think that would be helpful for this issue?
Sorry, it's late, CIT?
Crisis intervention team. It started in Memphis.
Yes. Yeah, I just had a brain.
It's okay.
So
I understand.
It will be helpful. It will be helpful. I think so. I just also am not widespread training in the academy. I think it's going to be less effective than what you're looking right now as specific team members who want to do this, so that other officers know there is a CIT out there that they can contact if there are certain incidences. I think that will be helpful. And I think it will be helpful also to have, frankly, more social service support teams and more dollars and resources for those social services teams to work with the police department. So it is where the relationships are built. It's all around homelessness, and most vulnerable people have to be. In the end, the solution needs to include housing and support services, and that wraparound support is a lack. And I think it's not the police department's role to house people, but to be able to actually have the resources that they can link people to housing and build those, and some of those relationships, simply if there are police officers that can help with move-ins, if somebody moves in from an encampment and they can help with some of those, move that person in, I think that will also create some of these relationships and shift how people view police or the certain officers and allow them to help. Another thing I wanted to mention, a lot of the complaints that start with trash. There's a lot of trash going on around the homeless encampments. I do not necessarily condone that we have teams that clean up on behalf of people, but if we can actually support with the cleanup and do it with the people and give them the trash cans and give them, you know, those are the things where when you work together on something, those are things that also can build relationships. That's mainly one of the things that we have been really pretty good with in Nashville. It still happens, but it's like it's really, we're trying to cut down on encampments. Shouldn't be removed unless there's a place for people to go. The reality is that not every person in an encampment can go and access a shelter bed, even if there is one available. So we need to, before any encampment is ever dismantled, it needs to be well thought out. There needs to be a multi-departmental and ideally with nonprofits involved plan on why and where are people going, and housing is going to have to be the destination that we work towards with people.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Is Mr. Holloman on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Well, we'll hear from you. You're going to be speaking about the experience as a Black trans man and the relationship with the police.
Yeah, so thanks for having me here. So just wanted to give you just a little bit of my kind of experience and just things that can help the trans community overall. I've lived in Nashville basically my entire life, so this is something that really means a lot. And right now, the trans community has no faith in the police department. I mean, we still remember just a couple years ago where those police officers were making fun of a transgender person on Facebook, and like that got us in the community. And this is why we don't want to interact with the police, because we're worried that we're going to be ridiculed or made fun of because they're going to be trying to figure out what bathroom do they go to, where should we put somebody. Those are the reasons why we don't, like, when things come up, we don't want to call the police. Like, why I myself personally don't want to interact with the police, because it could be seen as being Black and trans. I don't want to interact because I don't want to give a police officer any reason for why they would want to take me into custody for anything just because I'm existing. I still remember when I was in college, where I was turning off of 12th Avenue, trying to go to school one evening, and I got pulled over by a police officer because I looked like I did not belong in that neighborhood at that time. And so I had not yet transitioned at that point, but I was still very masculine presenting. And so the officer came back to me and questioned my ID, because my ID was from when I was 16 years old. And at that time I was 22 and looked different. And so that was my interaction with the police department, was them questioning who I am when I'm just trying to drive and go to school. At the end of the day, didn't get a ticket, no warning or anything. They just pulled me over because I didn't belong, because I was turning to go to Belmont. And that was basically the only thing he really said. He was like, you don't look like you belong in this area. And so that kind of feeling, and so now transitioning and knowing that I'm look as a Black male and walking around, we don't want to interact. I've talked to some people in the transgender community, my friends, and we don't want to call the police because we're worried. How are we going to be identified if we do get arrested? You know, are they going to go based upon what's on our birth certificate? Even though that in the state of Tennessee, I can't change my birth certificate to be male. I can change my gender on my driver's license, on my passport, on every other document that I have, but I can't change it on my birth certificate because I was born in the state of Tennessee. And so these are the things that we have concerns about and we're worried about. And it's concerns across the country of how do transgender people interact with the police? How do we make sure that we're going to be safe if, you know, for some reason we do have to be arrested because we did break the law? Like, we know that those are all things that are capable. And so, you know, there are people that are non-binary. Does the police department know how to interact with somebody that uses non-binary pronouns? How do you take somebody that's non-binary that may not identify as either male or female into custody? You know, those are the kind of things that we're always kind of trying to think about. And, you know, one of the recommendations would be to use self-identified gender. I don't know how non-binary works in a policing setting, but that's a real thing that we have to figure out, because there are people that don't identify as male or female, and using, you know, people's parts are not really a great way to do that. How are people going to be documented? What name are you using? Like, people may not have the money to change their legal name. It costs a lot of money for trans people, and trans people are usually underemployed. So if they don't have a good employer, they may not be able to change their name. So they may have a name that they go by, but it may not match their ID, because that's just, it's expensive. You know, if somebody is taken into custody, are they going to have access to their hormone treatments? That's a big fear for a lot of people, is that, you know, for any other kind of medical issue, they would have access to their medical treatment, but sometimes they think that it's not necessary because it's just hormone treatment. But a lot of people depend on that treatment. That's what makes them feel like themselves. Going to the bathroom, just like basic things that transgender people have to interact with on a day-to-day basis. Now you're putting them in this policing setting, and it's like, how do we work through that and make sure that you're being respectful of the person who is in that community? You know, having non-discrimination things in place so that transgender people feel comfortable going to the police, making sure there is, you know, cultural competency of knowing what pronouns are, the difference between sexual orientation and your gender identity, knowing those type of things, making sure that police officers aren't ridiculing people for how they present, because somebody may have male pronouns, but they may dress feminine. Those are things that all exist, but we can't be punished for not being like the norm. A lot of transgender people, unfortunately, do a lot of sex work, but there are people that don't. But using condoms is a way that we've kind of seen that, you know, people get taken in just because they have condoms on. They may think they're a sex worker, and that's not necessarily the case. They could just be, they just have them on there. So we have to make sure that we're not overly punishing people for how they live and who they are. You know, that's a big fear that I have. Like, I work for a healthcare company here in town, but I still have these same fears because I get pulled over just for driving in Nashville, you know, for different things. And so this is where, you know, we have a lot of concerns in the community of how do the police interact with us? Will it be a good experience? Will we be respected? Will we be ridiculed because maybe their ID doesn't match what their name is, what they go by? You know, so those can't be things. So we have to go by how people self-identify, not necessarily what the legal paperwork says. Some people, a lot of trans women, they may wear weaves, or they may have implants or anything like that, and that's what makes them feel like them. But that stuff may get removed if they get incarcerated. But for what reason? Like, I understand there's safety things, but you've got to make sure that people can still be themselves in that kind of environment. So it's really just about making sure that people are allowed to identify themselves and placing them based upon how they identify, because that is a big concern, but also making sure that we keep them safe, because it's a very difficult population, but it's a population that's growing here in Nashville. And so we have to have policies in place for how are we going to treat trans people, but not just put them into isolation because we don't know what to do with them. There's got to be something in place for this community so they know how they can feel comforted if something does happen, that they aren't going to have additional trauma on top of what has happened to end them up in interacting with the police department.
I know one of the themes in our committee we've talked about is cultural competency, but I almost see this as cultural sensitivity, to the needs of diverse people. And that is something I think we need to take very seriously in our recommendations, because I think that everyone needs to be trained and exposed and to have this understanding. So thank you very much.
Mr. Holloman, my
one-
name is Judge Melissa Blackburn. I'm a judge here in Davidson County. I want to tell you a couple of things. First, the Nashville Bar Association has pro bono attorneys that will do name changes free. There's a filing fee, but they will perform the legal services free. And when I was practicing, I did name changes free. So that makes that process a lot easier. So anyone that needs a name change, other than the filing fee, which used to be $150, that process can be done free. Also, I am the mental health court judge, and I deal with trans people all the time in mental health court. And I can guarantee you they're well respected. And I know numerous judges here in Davidson County. I understand there's an arrest process, but once you get before numerous judges here in Davidson County, I can guarantee you you'll be respected and you'll be treated fairly. Go ahead, Eli.
I was just going to say, it seems like a trend that we're hearing across the board, which is there is distrust because people are not seen and people are not understood with their identity. So when I heard the lady, I believe her name is Sabina, I really appreciate Sabina. She was showing the diversity of the Muslim culture throughout Nashville, which as an EL teacher for years, I absolutely know your Kurdish students are not the same as your Kenyan students, although they share a religion. And I'm hearing this right now from Mr. Holloman about the trans community. It's really about how can we talk about training, but at the end of the day, it's about creating an experience for the officers to see people. I'm a teacher. I have my first non-binary student this year. I have had a significant difficulty with the plural pronouns they, them in place of single pronouns he, she. I've wrestled with it. I've struggled. And this student has been so gracious with me. And I'm able to see this student because I have that experience. So really the question isn't, how can we make the training experiential for our officers to where they can see the need to see the identity of various communities around Nashville, because everybody cannot be policed the same way. We have to understand the communities deeply and understand their needs and their needs to identify. That's coming out to me over and over again in this, and I just wanted to push that out there. Thank you, Judge Blackburn. I appreciate it.
It's Jennifer Gamble speaking. Ray, I want to thank you for coming today and addressing our committee and talking about the experience of the transgender community. When you were talking about the fear of dealing with the police and being arrested, the first thing that came to me is, I wonder if that fear is also keeping individuals from the transgender community from reaching out to the police for help. I mean, if you're being assaulted, if your home is broken into, or are you also experiencing where you're not comfortable calling the police for help? And also, would it be helpful for the police organizations to work with community groups like Oasis Center, and there may be some other groups where we can establish better relationships with the transgender community?
Yeah, I would say for definitely that has stopped me from wanting to interact with the police. When the police, I was having some incidences in the neighborhood that I lived in where the police were showing up at my house because of dogs barking. That's literally why the police were showing up at my house. I had my wife answer the door just because I have such a fear and anxiety of they're going to see me. And at the time I had 2 pit bulls. I don't want to be seen as somebody that's training aggressive dogs. My dogs are barking because I live near the airport and they hear the airplanes all day. And so, yes, it does. I've known people that I've interacted with that have called me or have called somebody else in the community to be like, hey, can you come pick me up? My partner may be assaulting me, but I don't want to call the cops, but I need to get away from here, because they may be seen as the aggressor, because they may be their partner may be cisgendered and they may be trans. And so there's a fear that they're going to be the one taken in, even though they're the one that's being abused. And so there are people who do not interact with the police department just because there is that fear there that they will be seen as the aggressor when they're the ones actually the ones calling for help. So yes.
And on the other second part of the question, building better relationships. Do you think building better relationship with agencies like Oasis Center and agencies that support the transgender community would help? And do you know of any other organizations?
Yeah, unfortunately, in Nashville, we don't have actually a lot of good transgender organizations that are trans focused. Like there's places like the Oasis Center that is the entire LGBT spectrum, and that's a lot for youth. But when you start looking at adults, like there's things like the Chamber and the LGBT Chamber and Nashville Pride that are parts of it, but there's not really an organization that overall focuses on the transgender community. But I do think it is finding people that are well known in the transgender community and getting those people involved here in Nashville to make sure that we are doing the right things, because the transgender community is not that well put together here in Nashville to basically have like a single organization that everybody talks to, but everybody kind of knows different people throughout the communities and at different age stages of their lives. And so there's different groups of people for different age stages. And so I think just finding people and organizations like the Oasis Center, and there's some things that Vanderbilt has, like an advisory group that has some transgender people on it. There's different places that we'll have to interact with, because unfortunately, there's not just a one stop that we can go to interact with a lot of the trans people in Nashville.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Holman, for speaking with us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the invite.
And please stay on. Is Maxine on from Oasis?
I am.
You're up next. So tell us about your population at Oasis and issues with the police department. You've heard what others have said, so have at it.
Okay, well, thank you for the invite. And I want to go ahead and start by saying my pronouns. So my pronouns are she, her, hers, and they, and theirs. I kind of want to start out with a little bit of a disclaimer in that, I'm not necessarily speaking for all trans people. And I'm really speaking a lot from my experience, and any additional information that I currently give right here is information that I have also found that's related to what we're talking about here today. And before I even get even further into more of the information, I do kind of want to break down, transgender, the word itself, because, and not necessarily speaking for the Oasis Center, but when we're talking about LGBTQ plus people, there's so many identities within that. And we're talking about a community that's been defined by how we're breaking down our identities. And so breaking down identities by gender identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth, sexual orientation, which includes physical and emotional attraction. And so with this, we're currently thinking about mainly gender identity, but then also gender expression. And not to kind of like fully define transgender, there's many other ways that people are defining it. But how I'm currently defining transgender in the context of this conversation is people that do not necessarily identify with the gender that they were gendered as, not necessarily saying that they were given a specific sex and then they were given a specific gender, that you were told to be of that gender. And going further in that, when we're talking about gender identity and sex, there's a difference between the two. I think Ray referred to that as well. And so talking about, we're talking about sex assigned at birth, that's generally thought of as kind of genitalia, chromosomes. That's generally what that's thought of. And even with that, which is a separate conversation, there's a wide variety, but we still tend to think of that as a binary. And so when we're thinking about gender identity, we're thinking about, how people are understanding themselves and how people are focusing on who they are as a human being. And for the sake of this talk, and also to give a little bit more about how I even think about it, gender identity is kind of like thought of as a spectrum, from like male here to female here. But I would like to invite everyone to think about gender identity as more of a sphere. And so, but put the spectrum as part of your equator. And so you take this part, take the male end right here, take the female end here, wrap them around. And then for how people are describing their own individual gender to you, it's now constant with each label. That's where you can place different points on the map. It's never really a consistent thing because trans people aren't a monolith, but there's so many labels even under just the identity of being a transgender person. And there's also non-binary people like Ray was talking about, but these are both like umbrella terms. And so it's still a wide array of identities that, as like officials, you have to affirm. And I think one of the ways that people always go about talking about this is trying to say, like, how do you identify as? And there are some trans people, myself included, sometimes I say identify as. Well, I used to say a lot more, but now I say I am. So I would say to you, I am a trans woman, not necessarily saying I identify as that I am this without any question. And for each people, that's different. But when it comes to sort of like official matters, how I'm thinking about it is that, it's better to say, who are you? Let people have the freedom to say who they are to you, and not assume anything from that person. And now I kind of want to move into a little bit of like data that I found that's more sort of kind of related to trans people. And so the National Center for Transgender Equality did a survey back in 2015. It was very revolutionary information in that no one else had really done this kind of wide survey about trans people before. And in that survey, they found that half of trans people report that they are uncomfortable seeking police assistance. More than 1/5 of trans people, and that's like 22%, who had interacted with police reported police harassment. And 6% of trans people reported that they experienced bias-motivated assault by officers. And Black trans people reported higher rates of biased harassment and assault. And that's 38% and 15%, respectively. And trans people who have done sex work or participated in underground economies, as folks, especially marginalized folks like trans folks, are doing, given that jobs aren't as available when especially like you want to still be out in the workplace. Those folks that have done sex work or participate in underground economies, that includes about 16% of all trans people. Those folks have reported elevated levels of police violence. And when it comes to Latinx trans people, that's 34%. And Black trans people that are engaged in the underground economy, that's like 53%. So trans people who have been in the street economy or are in the street economy are more than twice as likely to report physical assault by police officers and 4 times as likely to report sexual assault by police officers. And thinking a little bit more specifically with young people, there's still only so much information out there, given that people are now really starting to try to study what's happening to our community. But I was able to find an article published by Professor Brandon Robinson, who uses they, them pronouns. And they conducted 40 in-depth interviews at shelters and a drop-in center with LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness. And these young people were 13 to 25 years old and in Central Texas. This, again, was back in 2015. And the pattern that was observed was for many of the young people, especially the transgender youth of color, they recall being subject to profiling simply because they were trans, or having police assume that they are participating in sex work and then being stopped, ticketed, and arrested because of that. And so now I'm going to get into a little bit of walking while trans. So for folks that don't know, for trans people, but especially trans women and Black trans women like myself, to go outside into the general public atmosphere and interact with police, there's oftentimes the profiling of being a sex worker. And because you are profiled and thought of that because you are dressed a certain way, and because going back into like how I was trying to talk about, the identity that people are putting onto each other, not necessarily the identity that we are understanding a person to have themselves, that police officers are thinking of trans women in a particular light, and therefore assuming that they're going out and participating in sex work, and therefore arresting them because of that. And so it's just people that are just going about living their daily lives, but then being arrested because, oh, you are dressed in this certain way, I think you are trans, you're a trans woman. And so therefore, if you're at this certain place, at this certain time of day, looking like how you look, that means that you must be doing something wrong. And ultimately, I think that that is really something that is really compounding sort of like distrust. And so I'm thinking for even myself as like a Black trans woman that, you know, it's already difficult enough to face the social rejection of society. In that whenever I go down the street, if I'm looking my best, my greatest, there is no assurance that I will be able to do that safely. And so to then ask of me to be comfortable and say, like, you should be comfortable calling police when I know that there is just the same amount of, or even more likelihood of that kind of harm being done to me, either being purposely misgendered or even being physically and mentally harmed through other means, then there's a disconnect there. And it does not, for my greater health or for any other trans person, but specifically speaking to an experience of being a trans woman, a Black trans woman, just even walking down the street, that is just so detrimental. And then people only feel like they can trust themselves. And so there's not as much of a reason people feel to trust police officers. Because, I mean, if the person that's like just down the way that, you know, might just be chilling and having like a really nice conversation with somebody, if all of a sudden I come by and then they start saying nasty things at me, how am I supposed to trust for sure that this police officer is not going to do the same, or is not even going to do worse to me, given that they have even more power? And so I think one of the things that becomes really important in my eyes, particularly, is kind of helping to really make sure that there's respectful communication. Then also, I think as Ray referenced, specifically talking about stronger non-discrimination laws. For NCTE, the National Center for Transgender Equality, if I remember correctly, they have specific layouts from that 2015 survey of different police departments. And I was able to look through that and see a couple things so our sister city, Memphis, which is my hometown, what they had not done very well. And so just 3 things that they kind of pulled out from this was use of respectful communication, that was not really pushed. It wasn't really something thought of. Also, non-discrimination statements based on gender identity and expression and sexual orientation. Given that, although specifically that, again, we're talking about trans people, there are trans people that are heterosexual, there are trans people that are gay, bi, however you define it. That's still, again, going by gender identity. But still having that non-discrimination statement that is focused on that. And then also strengthening civilian oversight and making sure that people feel like they have a say in the conversation when it comes to policing. And that even though there's still this kind of like wide, very disjointed, I feel like kind of, again, how like Ray was referencing, you know, there's only so many trans people around, but then also everyone is still kind of in their own circles sometimes. And there's only so much kind of like of a gathering that really goes on. So being able to say like, you deserve a place in this process and that you deserve a seat at this table to have some sort of like say in that kind of civilian oversight. And that's kind of where my thoughts are. And I'm very happy to entertain any questions that folks have.
Are there any questions?
Thank you for speaking to us. What you said boils it down very simply and very concisely, and it's very helpful to me.
And I will say this, I think that, you know, if you've ever read How to Be an Anti-Racist, Dr. Kendi talks about you really have to be overall inclusive if you consider yourself to be an anti-racist. You can't discriminate against one group and not another. And so I think that's really something that we, even as the African American community, is going to have to understand. And so I really thank you. Is there a Greta McLean? I'm not sure, Eric, if Greta McLean is supposed to speak. I didn't have her on the original agenda, but we're certainly.
She's not on the agenda.
Okay.
I think we had a few panelists that were not a part of the committee that got added, so.
Okay. Were there any questions for any of our panelists? If not, we'll let them have the rest of their evening and we could start our discussion of recommendations. Judge, if you're okay with that?
I think so. But when you all drop off, I think we've got to let Mayor Dean and I apologize. I'm out of town. I'm seeing a granddaughter who turned 1 that I have not seen for 10 months, and I do not have my mammoth book with everybody's information with me. So I apologize. Mayor Dean, I'm going to let you start it, and your partner in crime, and I'm so sorry, I don't have your name.
Lewis or John, whoever's here. Well, I don't really have anything to add. I just wanted to watch some of your meeting and hear some of the information you were receiving. And I hear you're all doing well and working hard on your recommendations. And we got I guess they're due tomorrow, and we got the big meeting on Wednesday. But I'm hearing all good things.
But see, your partner in crime, his name is Mayor's Policy.
It's Dwight Lewis.
Policy. So so I'm at a disadvantage so I don't have my book with your name in it.
Oh, that's okay.
So that's what I'm having a problem with.
I'll just echo what Mary Dean said. I'm enjoying the conversation, or enjoy listening to you all, and just want to listen in tonight. Thank you for allowing me to do so.
Well, Mr. Lewis, I apologize for not having your name. I don't have any of my information other than I printed yesterday when I got here to Austin, the information on the program tonight. So
that's all right. Don't worry about my name.
Yeah, but you're important. You and Mayor Dean are equally important. I got to make sure you all are in charge and leading this parade down the road. So
no, what you all are doing is, it's more important. So thanks.
Okay. Does anybody, before we start our conversation, have anything else you all want to add? Okay, Sharon, this next piece, you are in the driver's seat. Have at it.
Okay. Did everyone receive a very marked up copy? This is the way I'm used to doing things, and no one's given me a clear template. So this is how I do it. And this is sort of a combination of various individuals' comments as well as my comments and changing things. One thing I would like to point out, we do know that we want a recommendation surrounding community policing. One thing that's significant about that is we have found out, thanks to the work of Councilwoman Gamble, is that although there is a form of policing, community policing in the West Precinct, and we heard from them that there are other forms and variations throughout Nashville. We're not certain which one is better necessarily, but we do have a little more meat around that community policing. I don't know if Councilwoman Gamble, you want to kind of speak to your conversations with the West Precinct and some of the things that you found out. I did include with these recommendations a very informative narrative about the implementation of community strategies.
Yes, thank you. I did have a great discussion with Commander Corman and Sergeant Bacanza at the precinct about their community engagement teams, and they gave me detailed information about how they select team members and how they work with stakeholder groups in the community, churches, nonprofit organizations, neighborhood organizations, and they also talked about how their engagement teams consist of 6 officers and 1 chief or 1 commander, I should say, is a part of that team, and they are really only covering either 1 street or 1 community, whether it's an apartment complex or something like that. So they're utilizing quite a bit of staff for a small area in order for it to be effective. So that was one point that stood out to me about their particular program. I did attend the weekly CompStat meeting yesterday. CompStat, which is a weekly meeting that the commanders have with the chief, and then they talk about what's going on at the various precincts. And I learned at that meeting yesterday that there are many community engagement programs going on at different precincts throughout the city, and that there's not one particular model, which is probably where we might want to focus our efforts, is to having a mission, whether there is a community policing mission, and then maybe having a fundamental outline of what that looks like, so that the precincts could have a model that's unified to go by, and then they may add to it and alter it based on what works in their specific community. Because that's another thing that I learned yesterday, is that while all of them have different engagement strategies, it's not really a one size. I guess the fundamental part of it is one size fits all, as far as we're committing to do this, but how you do it and which groups you work with may differentiate based on what community you're in. So that was something that came out of that. But I think you all have the information that I was able to gather from the West Precinct to talk about their approach and how we might add that in.
David, I get you. You're up next.
Okay. Do you want to hear about the data committee?
Please.
Yes.
Well, just briefly, the data committee has been meeting simultaneously with the other committees each week, and we have prepared a set of recommendations and observations based on our review of the data that we will share with the committee chairs and vice chairs and the commission co-chairs next week in our half-day session. And it will also include pointing towards those data that we've identified that we think are relevant and that the commission ought to take into account as part of the overall commission recommendations and each committee's recommendations. So I think the data committee has worked hard to put that together, gather data. The data analyst from the police department has been very helpful and responsive in providing us information, and Dr. Valier from the community oversight group has been also extremely helpful in taking data and analyzing it and presenting it to us so that we can present it to the chairs and the vice chairs in a meaningful way. So we look forward to sharing that next week.
David, let me ask you this. One of the things as part of our recommendation on community policing is we want to make sure, one, that it works. Do you have any data that you've looked at that would indicate that the areas that have made a concerted effort to community police have better outcomes? Have you seen anything of that is captured in the data?
The only data that I can recall that we've seen on that is one that the committee saw when we looked at and were given the presentation about the West Precinct and the 40th and Clifton neighborhood and that community engagement pilot project. And the data there showed that crime statistics in that particular area went down significantly after implementation of this. Now, I think looking at it from a data perspective, whether there, you probably cannot trace a causal relationship to that because there are many factors that go into whether crime is up or down. So I think in terms of the data that's been put forward, that's what we have seen. What we'll share next week, and I'll preview now, is that the committee has recognized a need to establish metrics and figure out exactly how to track progress to see if the community engagement models that we think this committee and the commission will ultimately recommend are achieving their purpose. And there are examples from other cities. We've looked at New Orleans and some other places that are using data and metrics that could better evaluate the effectiveness of some of these new policing efforts. So I think what we will do is we will not be able to next week say, here are the data that demonstrate that this community engagement policing pilot has worked in West Nashville. What we will say is that we can recommend to the police department that going forward, it adopt new metrics and consider new sets of data that would do a better job of evaluating that, and that our recommendation that we will put forward to the committee chairs and the commission ultimately for recommendation is that the new police chief and the police department consider the better ways to measure progress on that front, and consider ways to measure the effectiveness of programs that seek to better engage the community.
Okay, that makes sense. So really the community policing recommendation, if nothing else, we do know, even if there's relatively anecdotal, that it does result in a level of community trust. And so we know that from our own experience in Nashville. And then you're going to recommend that they start tracking and see whether or not it actually leads to a decline or as a single factor. You know, I know how statistics work. There could be other things, you know, you could have a change in the demographics of a neighborhood. You have all kinds of things that could happen in a neighborhood that could lead to lower crime, but we need a sort of to see how we can figure that out. So does anyone else have any comments that they know that is not in the community policing recommendation language at all that we need to add to that paragraph, or anything else we need to make sure we capture?
I thought Council Lady Gamble did a phenomenal job of tying it in a bow.
I do too. That's very good, just to make sure that we realize we need to know more about other models. We do know that model could be the basic structural change stays the same for community policing, but each precinct, based on their interface with the community, may come up with different variations. So that's perfect.
And I guess
I
the
know
West
that-
Precinct has been doing it the longest. I think their program started in 2017, so they've been doing it the longest. And they do, as David mentioned, have the, I think it was a 46% reduction in crimes and also reduction in calls to the police precinct that they attribute to that program. I'm not sure what the metrics are that they attributed to that, but that's what they told me.
I have to
Also note.
I'm
Go
so
ahead.
glad I had this opportunity to look at the police department at this juncture, because we keep coming back to the fact that the police department, unfortunately, it's majority white, and our population is not. And we need to make a change. And that there are all these nuances in this police department that we need to look at, and we can do better. And I'm excited to see us do it better. And I think we can. And I'm so glad that Mayor Cooper said, let's figure it out. Let's, throw it all up in the air, see what happens when we put it back down again. And he put this commission together to figure it out. And I don't know how we all ended up in this pie, but I think it's fun to figure out how we can redo it,
I also wanted to point out, I sent an email to you, Judge Blackburn and Ms. Roberson, I don't know, a few weeks ago from Commander Dwayne Green. So he was working through the same concept of community policing, and he had come up with an entire page of defining it. Because I think various commanders are trying to get their hands on this from the different angles to see where they are aligned and how they can fit the pieces together. So I think that is also instructive and informative. So I know Commander Green was really helpful when I talked to him, and that was sort of the document that he gave me. So I just wanted to point that out. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll back up. I've got it. Sharon, it's yours.
Anyone else? All right. I was trying to get this more organized. The first, community policing, is really a recommendation for what the police are doing. Number two, about the collective efficacy strategy of community policing, is how they should go about doing community policing. It's a separate recommendation because it really has a lot of different elements to it. And this includes the community engagement. I think from what we heard from the speakers today, a lot of these different, what we view as vulnerable populations can be covered by this collective efficacy. Let's get together with the New Americas population and have them have a voice in the interaction with the police. If the police are in the community, we can't change the makeup of the police overnight. We're gonna, even probably years from now, hopefully we'll make some strides, but we'll have primarily white male police officers unless a whole bunch of people leave or we have a whole bunch of new officers. We hope to do better, but we're gonna have to make sure the ones that we have are well-trained, very sensitive to the needs of the community. That's why you're looking at these programs, the police athletic leagues, working with the churches, the homeless support groups, all of the groups that we heard from today need to be working in conjunction with the police to build this level of trust, because we had two fundamental issues in the community: lack of trust and the need for safety. And this is really putting those together and letting the community work with the police to build trust and also resulting in a safer community.
Sharon, one thing, we've got to make sure this is all the same font before we send it to anybody.
Oh, yeah, that's yeah.
I'd like to add something real quick. We have a lot of must-dos, and I think if we're making recommendations, we should say should consider, because there may be alternates that come up that are at least equal to or more appropriate for Nashville or superior to what we're suggesting. So I think instead of us making recommendations where we say must, which to me sounds like we're saying you got to do this, we should say should consider, because there might be some better things out there that we don't know about yet.
Sharon, I don't have the big book. So how was our question phrased? Look at how our question was phrased and make sure we respond in the same tone as our question was.
And I would add to what Tom just said, because Tom, I was about to read a sentence that I've written: the police department must take the lead. So I'll be willing to defer to you and said could take the lead. But I think in developing and implementing a coordinating entity that can, in partnership with various nonprofits, deliver the appropriate responses, whether it be mental health, homelessness, domestic disputes, youth referral, child services, all these organizations that we're suggesting could collectively make a difference in the community. So I would just suggest something that says to that this piece has to have a leader, and I think it should be the police department saying we'll lead it, and the new chief saying we'll lead it.
Yeah, I think so too.
The other piece is we were asked to say what has to be done within 12 months, 18 months, and what has to be done by the community. So we were given timeframes, specific timeframes. Sharon, have you got that document in front of you?
Yeah, I don't have that one. I have my whole big book over here, but I was going from the perspective of I think you wanted us to say this is what we think you should do. But like I said, this is all coming from an interpretation of one very tired, worn out mind, and an old one to boot. So if someone has, I get a different viewpoint. This is it's just a difference in approach, but I can see that we don't necessarily want to be demanding. So we should say, should consider as the tone of the document. So just let me know how you want that to look. That's a very valid point. So if everyone's in agreement, we can change that rather than saying, I did try to say the committee recommends it, but this is going through each point. And rather than saying we must, you're saying we should consider, or we recommend that you consider, and things of that nature. And that's fine, because it is going both ways throughout the document. So that will make it more consistent if we take that approach. But just let me know.
I kind of like the way that flows. I mean, I like 98% of everything that's written down. And I'm just really maybe being a little too picky. But I think the group gets to decide that.
Well,
So we should consider adoption of, okay, that makes sense.
and I think when the mayor gets ready to hire a chief, the mayor could say, "You will."
That is his prerogative.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I think what we're really trying to do is build community support that says it almost says you will without us saying it.
Right.
But I think he's wanting us to say, these are the communities, these are what the community wants to achieve. This is what the community is asked to be done.
It says reimagining how Nashville can build trust and enhance community safety. That's the big bucket. And then it talks about these conclusions will represent our findings, etc. But that's the big title for this committee. We're supposed to reimagine how Nashville can build trust and enhance community safety. Our recommendations should make sure they capture that general statement.
I feel good about what's written then because I think we're reimagining a lot of things.
I know.
And we've looked outside the box.
Okay.
Thank you all for all your hard work.
Now, I have a comment here, and I remember this because I take notes during the meeting. This is under number 2, and I said, Bob Fisher commented that we need to be more specific of how we will develop networks of community groups. We should look at MMPD establishing a fund that later on I talk about establishing the fund, but do you think within this one, because later on I do have more specifics about the groups, I did add that in, and number 3 deals with, that's along the lines of no money, no mission. And it seems like there are overlaps on these recommendations, but I think that that's worth talking about because that's a separate recommendation because you can adopt community policing as a strategy. You can bring in community groups, but not necessarily have a fund designated for this purpose. So that's what number 3 is dealing with, having some sort of fund within the police department, some sort of funding that maybe flows through the police department to support this collaboration amongst community groups.
Didn't you mention the Community Foundation and other nonprofits, but as an overview, not just for one specific piece of this, but right. CIT, the other foundations that work with the police department to work in these neighborhood groups, to work with the school resource officers, all these different pieces that police officers where they need money to have other support.
Is that a question, Judge?
Yes, it's a question.
Okay. Yeah.
Expound.
Yes, Your Honor. I think you're right. And I do think it is I think number 3 not only involves creating some sort of funding mechanism, but also for 3, but also for 2, for coordinating 2, for bringing that together. And, and I think we agree on what we're doing. There just needs to be some sort of word transition that makes that happen.
We all know that there are lots of resources out there for money. You and I and Sharon have all dug into those pies before, and anybody else knows there are. And the key is for anyone that has ever not asked for nonprofit dollars, when you have a pie of nonprofit dollars, like with the state of Tennessee and the grant we're looking at for CIT, which is a $5 million grant over 5 years, once you get that in the pie, Bob picks up the phone and goes and asks somebody else. We go ask the Community Foundation. We got matching dollars from Pot Z. Sharon knows we can get matching dollars from Pot X because we've got a pot already. Other foundations will give us more money. Once you have a single pot, matching dollars and other dollars come from all over pots everywhere you can find that make a huge difference because people like to partner with other pots.
Well, and what you really, the real power of it comes when you have people that you're funding who coordinate the activities of other organizations who already want to help and always are trying to help. They just need some help in knowing how to help.
Once we show them how they can help and what a difference it's going to make, and it's not just in one way, not with CIT or the community policing or school resource officers, it's going to help in 10 different ways. They're going to get really excited and write a bigger check.
Yeah. Yeah. So, again, Sharon, and we're at the point of trying to do final editing today, right?
That's the theory. That's the premise we're operating under. It's kind of a rough premise, but yes. Well, here's what happened. It says final, but it's not. Well, I won't say final because people might slow down, but let's just say final, sort of, kind of, because it's supposed to be final, but there will be another longer half-day meeting, which we try to put some of the numbers and other things and refine it, but it should be in pretty good shape by tomorrow.
She has to turn it in tomorrow. It's bottom line.
And so you can take what we're saying right now and integrate that into the text. And I mean, I agree with Tom Turner's assessment earlier. I think we're really, really close to being there. We just need to make sure we connect a couple of the dots here.
Okay, well, people can shoot me an email, even later this evening and let me know, because like I say, I don't want to, I can scribe and I can wordsmith and try to get it organized, but this is almost, I need a collective, understanding of what you would like included in this document.
Sharon, what's your email?
Sharon, SHARON, Roberson, ROBERSON at YWCANashville.com.
And if you see her the next time and she has white hair, you'll know what she's been doing.
I'm happy to look at it later tonight, Sharon, if you're working on it.
Oh yeah.
So if you send it back out to the group or to, however it works, I'm happy to look at it.
Okay.
And again, thank you all for all your hard work on this project. It means a world of difference to the city of Nashville.
And I will tell you one thing, when we're looking at this, and you might want to have this information as you look at the document, I constructed this such that, kind of like I would other arguments, if one of the recommendations falls by the wayside, the others could stand on their own. And that's why you may see some of them are kind of along the same lines. But I thought in case, let's say we decide we don't want to go with, collective efficacy, fine. We still have community policing. We still have a funding mechanism. We still have the vulnerable populations addressed. So I will, well, I guess, Eric, can you resend? You're on your computer. I don't know if you can or not. If you could resend out the draft to the group, or D or somebody, John, someone.
Sharon, did you say .com or .org?
.com.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Okay.
And I have one more thought on use of force. I know that that's one of our ultimate goals is reduction of use of force, or what we all might collectively consider inappropriate use of force. But John Bunton, is that really under our purview, or did we decide that it was under someone else's purview as a committee?
When we talked about it, I think we did say that it was more directly under the policies committee.
So you're going to hold their feet to the fire, right?
I think we all are in our own way.
So
starting in 22 minutes.
It was part of the original charge under this group, but you want to take out 6 altogether in our draft.
I think that was my suggestion, but of course we will have a reconciliation opportunity next week.
Out now. I'm taking it too late, John.
Okay.
But we all get to look at the big big document and see if it's encompasses the things that we think are
Of
appropriate for our
course.
community.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
we're not giving up on it. It's just somebody else's.
I think it might be a good idea, though, Sharon, to keep it in and just see once the reconciliation happens, if your wording may be insightful for their wording, right? Because I think from the community's perspective, and we're talking about community and lack of trust, police use of force is a big deal. So I think your wording might be able to reconcile with theirs. It can't hurt to keep it in and then just see how it reconciles. If they choose to take it out, then that's fine. But that would be my vote, but I'm just one person.
I think that's good, Eli.
And I think the reason it was part of our charges because at the end of the day, this is it. Use of force is this is it. De-escalation. Whether you're dealing with the trans community, immigrant, homeless, mental ill, all of it. Use of force is when that's when the problems start.
Eli, I want you to kiss me above your head instead of that use of force block.
What? I don't know what you're saying, but I'll do whatever it is.
Your head is this block that says "kiss me."
Oh, right up there. Is that what you're talking about? That's my wife and I, and my daughter and I. So sorry, I didn't know what you were talking about. Now I see what you're talking about. Okay, my bad. I'll fix it for you.
No, I think that should be instead of use of force dash kiss me.
Okay, that'll work.
I think that's a great use of force.
That'll work for me.
Judge Blackburn, you have great eyesight because I could not read what that says.
She has
I didn't realize everybody was thinking about this. Hold on, let me scoot a little closer for you. Let me bring it in.
I didn't even know. I do have a question though. Where are we, and I may have missed it, where are we putting in the report the data collection where we're recommending that a system be set up to track and evaluate or measure the effectiveness of the community policing? Are we putting that in community policing, or is that a separate? I guess it could go in community policing.
I didn't hear that either. Thank you, Council Lady. I didn't hear that either.
It actually is under 4 of public policy decisions.
Okay.
And the committee recommends that MMPD staff be assigned to comprehensively research and identify all available programs and funding sources specifically addressing these unique challenges while facing. That's a different thing. I
wonder if this question will be answered once the data committee gets back the way that they're, because I know that David mentioned that for next week. I wonder if that's something that data would want to tackle. I don't know though, Councilperson Gamble, I don't know, but I just wonder if it fits better there.
I think
what she's really talking about is researching. Do you want to research you're talking about researching the.
I think he said he's going to present that Wednesday at the meeting, that they have that as part of their process.
Okay, well, we may not need it then in this report as far as measuring.
Will you write that down somewhere so we make sure that comes out into this on Wednesday? Because I think that's what he said they're going to present.
Yeah, that's correct. You'll have information for the committee chairs on that issue. So that should be we'll see on Wednesday if that meets what the committee is looking for. But I think we will present information on that.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, but that is important that we don't just. Okay.
See, we were listening, David.
Now, before we talk about public policy decision, this is really standard to me. I always think that you have to really start with the structural foundation to have some sort of overarching change in philosophy, which i.e. change in public policies to determine that the role that police play in community safety. Because, for instance, we talk about sending another group versus this and that and the other. You can't do that one-off. You're going to have an overall policy shift to say that in Nashville, rather than doing it this way, we're going to that way. And they're gonna have to, those policies are gonna have to be supported, probably from the mayor's office. It probably is gonna take some sort of interaction at the state level to determine the functions of police and if they're gonna change. We can't just change that by putting a few community police officers out there. You're gonna have some kind of policy shift.
Do we need to change that paragraph based on the conversations we had today?
Yes, yes. Oh, yeah. All those musts are going to change. They're going to all change too.
No, just that, but talking about the immigrants, talking about the notes I took today, the trans community.
Well, I do have the committee. We discussed what the Nashville hub offered in the area of information to the public, but the committee recommends the MNPD staff be assigned to comprehensively study and identify all available programs and funding sources to specifically address the needs and unique challenges facing underserved population, including mentally ill, homeless individuals, immigrants, new Americans, formerly incarcerated, and juveniles.
I think you need to add LGBTQ.
Okay.
And trans.
Yeah, that's the plus will cover trans.
Okay.
LGBTQIA plus. That's what I used to just off the tip of my tongue. That's what I say. But okay. But I don't know if that's a valid recommendation. It seems kind of to comprehensively research and identify. Who's gonna do that? Is that gonna be you all, Derek John? I would say, who are these magical staff of MNPD? They may not have anyone that can do this kind of thing. The police department, do they have a research unit? Do they have, is this a pie in the sky? We're reimagining, but we won't be in a total dream world.
Sure.
No, they have a research unit, and they actually routinely go out and look for grants and partnerships with federal agencies. This is in their wheelhouse.
And as I said, to deal with it. I've had trans people in my courtroom that I've had to incarcerate, and somebody has to deal with it. And I've got someone in the sheriff's office that deals with it. So they're safely placed in the jail system, unfortunately.
Yeah, you're going to have to kind of have, but that's why I get into these public policy determinations. That you go to a jail based on your gender identity, that's higher than just this lower level recommendation. So that's really something that has to be a policy change.
Beyond that, it's beyond that. And it's working with someone in the jail that deals with mentally individuals, and we place them in a safe space.
Just so I understand, Sharon, is the goal of this recommendation, is the goal to try to get at different functions that other organizations should take that currently police are taking? So, for example, when there's a call that comes in, you send a different organization? Or is this to get at how organizations can support people once they're in police custody? What's the goal of this recommendation right here?
Well, I got into, remember we talked about 911 and how you go about where you send the calls to, and that was part of, that I was thinking about that, but somehow we got away from that. But I think it's from the beginning to the end when the police, who is sent out there, if the police should be out there and they find out the situation is different than what they thought, it really is a mental illness situation as opposed to the others, they should have the competency to figure that out. And then they'll be able to access one of these others. So it could really depend on the circumstance. It could be a community police officer that realizes, well, we have a situation here, let's call, a mobile crisis, as opposed to calling the police even.
When you start seeing what the community COB is putting forth that met last night, there is also some of this in that proposal. It's dealing with the police officer goes out first, and the police officer keeps the peace, decides what is going on, keeps everyone safe, else needs to be there. And that's the whole purpose. The police officer keeps the peace and brings the resources to the situation that needs to be brought. But it's about bringing other resources to the site. It's not about the police officer treating the individual who has some other need. It's about the police officer being able to bring community. And then the police officer, once the site is safe, going about the police officer's business, but relying on our community resources to be there.
It's a version. We have what we work with the Metro Police here at the YW at our Weaver Domestic Violence Center. We have our 24-hour call center. And the way the lethality assessment program works is when a police officer is on a partner violence call, they have a questionnaire and they ask the female, it's typically female, but it can be male. They ask them a series of questions based on those responses. Although the police officers on the call, they realize that there's something more there. Based on responses to that, they've all been trained. We train them regularly. Then they call, they ask the person, do you want to talk to someone? Because based on your responses, your situation can become lethal in the future. And a lot of times the women will say, I want to talk to someone. Then they actually give them a phone that they can talk to a counselor at the YW's 24-hour crisis line. They can walk them through safety planning. If they are interested in shelter, we offer them that. But at a minimum, they understand better their circumstance. And that's kind of what we're talking about, those kind of relationships with community partners, where even though the police are on the scene, because of their training, they sort of know, wait, this is something that I'm going to come back and it's going to be a homicide. Right now, I'm on a domestic violence call. In order to prevent a homicide, I'm going to ask her these questions, and she, has a right to say, I don't want to talk about it. But a lot of times they do, and someone's on that phone to kind of walk you through, your situation. I think that's kind of a version of what we're talking about.
It is, and it's a mental health situation. It is an unstable situation. It's a suicide. It's whatever, but we're trying to triage that situation, take it out of the officer's hands because it's not his problem. He's not equipped to deal with that problem. We're bringing in the people that are equipped to deal with that problem and put that officer back out on the street.
Right, and something that Judith said stuck with me. She said we need more social support teams to work with the police. And one thing I learned yesterday from Chief Drake is that they have hired some, and Larry, maybe you can speak to this, they have hired some Gideon's Army people to help go in and de-escalate problems. So maybe that's another piece of that, not just having a number to call, but also bringing in some social support to work with the police directly on some of those mental health and cultural issues.
Yeah, what you get into, we know how our police force is made up, they're white males primarily, but this way, if you can't hire enough police officers, you can almost have this other resource that could bring that cultural diversity to the police force. And that's what you're really talking about.
Absolutely. That's what this is.
I also wonder, based upon what John said earlier, the research department, there's also this feeling when Sergeant Procanza was here talking about police feel like they respond to too many calls. If maybe the research department could kind of take the lead in saying these calls could be handled by this nonprofit or this organization in this way. These calls need to partner with us, and then these calls we need to handle ourselves. I just wonder where that fits in, because I think one of the things we want to do is we want to get the right people to the right places with the right training, and right now that's not always happening. So I just wonder. I don't know the best approach, but I just wonder.
Yes, this is Larry. Well, sometimes you got community members that call on organizations to come, and the community members will be there maybe before the police even get there. So you may have someone that call the police, but then you may have some members that call Gideon's Army. So it's like that, because we had an incident that happened over here in Cheatham Place 2 nights ago, where some people shot at Rocky Wings on 9th Avenue. The owner called us because he said he had called the police. The police never came. So we came through, talked to him, found out what went on, then went through the community, talked to a few people. And, as of now, we just making a heavy presence in that area just to let them see that, we're around. And if they want to talk to us, come through, talk to us. And those that we got relationships with, we pull up on them, but we ain't trying to pull no information out of them. We let them volunteer the information because, of course, we not the police. So we don't want to come across like, some people get leery when you just come in just asking questions. So most of the time you just got to go in and listen and see what they volunteer.
That's great.
Yeah, it's very true because there'll be a domestic violence situation. They'll call the YW crisis line before calling the police also. And we will tell anyone if there's a immediate danger, you do need to call the police because we can't get there. We're not physically able to get out there. So we do tell individuals this. Now, if you have the opportunity, we work with you on safety plan, but we tell you to call the police if you're in immediate danger. Okay, well, we only have a couple more minutes, but on this cultural competency and police support, I did think it was worthwhile for us to, these are a lot of changes, a lot of things, and we want the police officers because the police officers may feel as though they are safer when they don't have to go through de-escalation. And I will say de-escalation does have or potentially some increased risk to police officers because in trying to de-escalate, things could happen. So I think it's very important for us to really look at how we train the police officers and also get mental health support and respite for officers because I think that sometimes the cases will get out of control because everyone is in a bad state of mind. The police officers in a bad state of mind, the people in the community in a bad state of mind, and you can't, serve our communities well and be these wonderful community police officers, SROs, etc., if we do not pay attention to the mental health of the police officers. Number 7 was kind of a catch-all. I thought somebody would say, well, that's too much in one lump, but nobody's saying anything. I thought someone would say, well, those are two different things. Cultural competency, accountability, and also some sort of support for police officers. So it's really one recommendation, but it really, I think that, if you really want these police officers to do all these, to really be sensitized and everything else, you're going to have to give them time to get their mental health in order because I just think it's very important, but it could be two different recommendations. It could be one, but I think the budget should reflect the dedication to cultural competency and also to support of the police officers. But if this is too much to throw at you, if everyone could get me, because I'll be up early, kind of putting some final touches on this. So if tonight you have something you can send me, or early in the morning something you can send me, I'll work it in. I think what's the deadline, time of day? Where's John or Dio or Eric? What's the actual time of the turning in?
And guys, what is it?
There's actually no timestamp on it, but it would really be good to have it by 2 p.m. That would be great.
Okay, that's good. Don't tell me no time. See, I'm a lawyer. I'm used to operating, slide up to the last minute. Can you stand? I'm not used to no time. I'll get you at midnight. It's 12:01 or.
Okay, Sharon, it's not like a court thing.
Sharon's thinking like a college student.
Can I slip under the professor's door?
So Sharon, will 2 p.m. allow you to get some sleep?
Oh yeah, I'll be fine. I mean, it really is up to the committee because, like I said, this is a lot of our things, and And I do work very intensely and very quickly. So, you know, I mean, this is relative to my life. You know, I've had a lot, you know, darker days than this. Trust me on this. This is a cakewalk.
Thank you, Sharon, so much for doing this. We all appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you. Sharon, is there any particular point or anything you need help with trying to reorganize that I'd be happy to help with?
The biggest thing is I think there's some redundancy. Some of them are saying the same thing, and I don't know if they want the recommendations to be one sentence or a paragraph or whatever. That I don't know. So they're really more in a narrative as opposed to bullet points. Because some bullet points. But if someone thinks, well, this is the same thing and these need to be combined, that's something I do need help with.
Okay, I can help with that. I was looking at that in community policing and thinking the same thing. So I'll look at the others as well.
Okay, anything else?
I'm going to go watch the news, see if we're going to have a debate here at Belmont. See.
Good luck. I mean, I hope so. I hope you do. I hope you do. But you know,
I still have hopes, but we'll see.
All of the work that has been put into it at the ComStat yesterday, the police talked about all of the planning and they are ready, everything that has been, not to mention what your campus, what you all have done to prepare.
Yeah.
I mean, but anyway.
Yeah, if you heard that briefing, you know that we've got an outstanding group of professionals out there capable of doing some really great work in the So
I agree, and you need to have someone make sure you don't forget the fly strips.
Forget what?
And get a referee whistle for that moderator.
The fly strip. Did you see the fly on?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. I have to tell you all this. My daughter suggested, my New York daughter suggested that what we should do is get a moderator who's been homeschooling 3 kids for the last 6 months and give her an air horn and a water hose, and she will keep order. So, but I'm not saying that to the press.
I know, don't say that. Well, I will say what my 90-year-old father said. He said they need to get one of those little weeping willow trees, and that could take care of that. But I won't go into detail. Those were darker days.
I remember those willow trees. We had 3 of them in my yard.
Well, I'm going to move over to our next committee. We just let this live stream session come to an end.
All right, that's good. Sounds like
good. Thank you.
Okay, bye everybody. Thank y'all. Looking forward to tomorrow.
Good night.